You're digging your own grave, woman, and your baby's grave, too." Jacob Thornton's words hit harder than the pickaxe in Eleanor Harrison's bleeding hands. She was 7 months pregnant, covered in mud, standing in a hole she'd carved into the hillside with nothing but desperation and stubbornness. She didn't stop digging. "Did you hear me?" Thornton demanded from his horse. "The whole town's laughing at you. They're taking bets on when you'll give up." Eleanor drove the pickaxe into the clay, pulled, threw the dirt aside. Then she looked up at him with eyes that had buried a husband and refused to bury hope. "Tell them to save their money. They'll need it for coffins when winter comes." Thornton rode away laughing. 4 months later, he crawled through her door on his hands and knees, begging her to save his dying children. Before we continue, if you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Comment below what city are you watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Eleanor Harrison decided to dig herself into a mountain, she woke up vomiting blood. Not much, just enough to stain the wash basin pink. Just enough to remind her that her body was failing, that the baby inside her was draining everything she had, that another winter in this cabin would kill them both. She wiped her mouth and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror Daniel had hung above the basin 3 years ago. The woman staring back was a stranger. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under eyes that used to sparkle, hair that had gone gray at the temples sometime in the last 6 months, though she couldn't remember exactly when. "You look like death," she told her reflection. Her reflection didn't argue. Outside, the September wind was already carrying the promise of snow. Eleanor could smell it, that sharp metallic scent that meant winter was sharpening its knives. In Pennsylvania, where she'd grown up, that smell had meant nothing more than inconvenience. Here in Wyoming territory, it meant survival or death, and nothing in between. She placed her hand on her belly. The baby kicked hard, insistent, alive. "I know," Eleanor whispered. "I know, we have to do something." But what the cabin Daniel built was a death trap. She'd known it since their first winter, when the temperature inside dropped so low that the water in the wash basin froze solid. She'd known it when she had to burn their only chair to keep the fire going through a 3-day blizzard. She'd known it when she woke up one morning with ice crystals in her hair, her breath visible in the gray dawn light, her fingers so numb she couldn't feel them for hours. Daniel had promised to fix it, to chink the gaps in the logs, to rebuild the chimney that leaked more smoke than it vented, to add a second room so they wouldn't have to sleep 5 feet from a fire that could kill them if it sparked wrong in the night. Daniel had promised a lot of things. Then February came, and the ravine took him, and promises didn't matter anymore. Eleanor pulled on her coat and stepped outside. Biscuit, her golden retriever, was waiting on the porch, tail wagging despite everything. He'd been Daniel's dog, first a wedding present from her husband's brother in Missouri. Now he was hers, the only living creature who didn't look at her with pity or judgment. "Come on, boy. We're going to do something crazy." The hillside behind the cabin had always fascinated her. It rose gently for about 50 feet, covered in scrub brush and loose rock before leveling off into a plateau. Daniel had dismissed it as useless, too steep to farm, too rocky to build on, too far from water to matter. But Eleanor saw something else. She saw shelter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. Thomas Penrose, Cornish miner, dead these 15 years, but never truly gone. "The earth is your mother, Ellie girl. She'll hold you when nothing else will. She'll keep you warm when the world above is trying to freeze you solid. You just have to know how to ask." Eleanor had been 8 years old when he first took her into the tin mines of Cornwall. She remembered the fear, the darkness pressing in the weight of all that rock above her head, the certainty that the whole mountain was about to collapse and crush her like a bug. But then her father had placed his hand on the tunnel wall, and he'd smiled. "Feel that?" he'd asked. "Feel what?" "The warmth. We're only 40 feet down, and it's warmer here than it is above. The deeper you go, the warmer it gets. That's the Earth's heartbeat, Ellie girl. That's her telling you she's alive, and she wants to keep you alive too." Eleanor had felt it then. And she'd never forgotten. Now standing on a Wyoming hillside with a baby growing inside her and a winter coming that would show no mercy, she felt it again. The earth wanted to help her. She just had to be brave enough to ask. The first swing of the pickaxe nearly broke her. The impact traveled up her arms through her shoulders into her spine. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Her knees buckled, and for a moment she thought she was going to collapse right there face first into the dirt she was trying to move. But she didn't collapse. She couldn't. Because collapsing meant dying. And dying meant her baby died too. And that was the one thing Eleanor Harrison refused to accept. She straightened up, adjusted her grip, swung again. This time a chunk of earth came loose. Not much, maybe the size of her fist. But it was something. It was progress. It was proof that the impossible could become possible one swing at a time. One swing at a time, she muttered, echoing her father's words. That's all it takes. One swing at a time. By noon she had carved a gash 2 feet deep into the hillside. Her hands were hamburger blisters broken, and bleeding skin torn in places she didn't know skin could tear. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through them. Her back was screaming so loud she could barely think. But 2 feet was 2 feet. 2 feet was closer to survival. She was sitting on a rock, trying to convince her trembling hands to hold a cup of water when the shadow fell over her. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Jacob Thornton. Of course it was Jacob Thornton. The man had a sixth sense for appearing whenever Eleanor was at her most vulnerable. Building a shelter, she said without looking up. A shelter. He laughed, that sharp, dismissive bark that made Biscuit growl low in his throat. Woman, you're digging a hole in a hill. That's not building. That's losing your mind. Maybe. There's no maybe about it. You're pregnant, you're alone, and you're playing in the dirt like a child. The whole territory's talking about it. Let them talk. They're not just talking. They're worried. Some folks think you've gone crazy with grief. Some folks think you need to be locked up somewhere safe before you hurt yourself. Eleanor's head snapped up. Locked up? For your own good. And the baby's. She stood slowly, ignoring the pain that shot through every muscle in her body. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Thornton was 6 feet 2 and built like a barn. But when she looked him in the eye, something in his expression flickered. Let me tell you something, Mr. Thornton. My husband is dead. My family is dead. I have nothing in this world except this land, this baby, and my own 2 hands. And I will use those hands to dig until I hit bedrock or hell itself before I let anyone take what's mine. I'm trying to help you. No. You're trying to make yourself feel better about not helping me. There's a difference. Thornton's face reddened. Now listen here. No, you listen. You've ridden past this cabin 100 times since Daniel died. You've seen the holes in the walls. You've seen the smoke leaking through the roof. You've seen me struggling to chop wood with a belly out to here. She gestured at her swollen middle. And not once have you stopped to offer help. So don't you dare come to me now when I'm finally doing something about my situation and pretend you care about my well-being. Thornton opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. That's what I thought. Eleanor turned her back on him and picked up the pickaxe. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Thornton, I have a grave to dig. She heard his horse's hooves retreating. She heard Biscuit's tail thumping against the ground in satisfaction. But she didn't turn around. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not ever again. That night alone in the cabin that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, Eleanor sat by the fire and let herself remember. Daniel's face swam up from the darkness of her memory. His smile crooked easy, the kind of smile that made you believe everything would be all right even when it clearly wouldn't. His hands calloused from work, but gentle when they touched her. His voice low and warm, telling her stories about the future they were going to build together. We'll have 3 kids. he'd said on their wedding night, holding her close in the narrow bed of the boarding house where they'd spent their first night as husband and wife. 2 boys and a girl. The boys will help me work the land, and the girl will be just like you, smart and stubborn and beautiful. What if we have 3 girls? Then I'll be the happiest man in Wyoming, surrounded by women who love me and never let me win an argument. She'd laughed. He'd kissed her. And for one perfect moment, the future had seemed bright and certain and good. That was 4 years ago. Now Daniel was bones in the ground, and Eleanor was pregnant with a child he would never meet, digging a hole in a hillside that everyone said would be her tomb. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered to his memory. "For you and for her. I'm going to keep her alive, Daniel. I promise. Whatever it takes." The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere deep in her belly, the baby kicked once, twice, 3 times as if to say, "I'm here. I'm counting on you. Don't give up." Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She planned. By the end of the first week, the tunnel was 4 feet deep. By the end of the second week, it was 8. By the end of the third week, Eleanor hit clay. She knew what it was the moment her pickaxe sank into it, that dense, heavy, magnificent clay that her father had called the miner's best friend. It held its shape when you carved it. It didn't crumble or collapse. It sealed against water like wax. It was quite literally the difference between a tunnel and a tomb. "Thank you," she breathed, pressing her palm against the cool, damp surface. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She wasn't sure who she was thanking. God, the earth, her father's ghost, maybe all 3. But the clay changed everything. She could shape the tunnel now, carving it into the oval chamber she'd envisioned. She could trust the walls to hold while she worked. She could. The pain hit without warning. It started in her lower back, a sharp cramping that bent her double. Then it spread to her belly, squeezing, tightening, stealing her breath. No, 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 not now. It's too early. She's not due for 2 more months. Eleanor dropped the pickaxe and staggered toward the tunnel entrance. She needed air. She needed help. She needed... The second cramp hit harder than the first. She went down on her knees, gasping, one hand clutching her belly while the other clawed at the dirt. "Please," she whispered. "Please, not yet. She's not ready. I'm not ready." The pain receded. Slowly, reluctantly, like a wave pulling back from the shore. Eleanor stayed on her knees for a long time, breathing, waiting, praying. When she was finally sure the cramps weren't coming back, she crawled out of the tunnel and sat in the autumn sunshine, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Biscuit pressed against her side, whining. "I'm okay," she told him. "We're okay. It was just a warning. The baby's telling me to slow down." But she couldn't slow down. Winter was coming. The tunnel wasn't finished. And every day she rested was a day closer to the cold that would kill them both. She had to keep going. She had to. Martha Brennan arrived 2 hours later, as if summoned by some sixth sense that told her when pregnant women were in trouble. "You overdid it," the old midwife said flatly, her hands pressing against Eleanor's belly with practiced efficiency. "The baby's fine, but you're not. You've been working too hard, eating too little, and sleeping even less. Am I wrong?" "No." "Then you know what you need to do." "I can't stop. The tunnel isn't finished." "Child, if you kill yourself trying to finish that tunnel, the tunnel won't matter. You understand me. Dead women don't need shelter. Dead babies don't need warmth." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She looked at Martha, really looked at her, past the weathered face and the sharp tongue to the genuine concern beneath. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, and her voice broke on the question. "I can't survive another winter in that cabin. I can't. And no one will help me. No one believes this is possible. No one—" "I believe you." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "I said I believe you." Martha sat down beside her, joints creaking. "I've known miners in my time, Cornish men mostly working the silver veins out past Laramie. They talked about underground shelters the same way you do. Said the earth stayed warm year-round at certain depths. Said you could survive anything if you knew how to dig. Then why didn't you say anything? Because believing something is possible and believing you can do it are two different things. The old woman's eyes were sharp, assessing. But I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen what you're building. And I'll tell you something I've never told another living soul. What? Something bad is coming. I don't know what. I don't know when. But my bones have been aching in a way they've never ached before, and that always means a killing winter. The kind that takes the young and the old, and everyone in between who isn't ready. She gripped Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. You might be the only person in this territory who's getting ready, and I'll be damned if I let you die before you finish. How can you help? I can barely lift the pickaxe anymore. Martha smiled a thin, hard smile that held no warmth but plenty of determination. I know people. People who owe me favors. People who might be willing to help a pregnant widow if I ask them nicely. She paused. And by nicely, I mean threatening to tell their wives about certain indiscretions. Despite everything, Eleanor laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed since Daniel died. The help arrived 3 days later. Not much, just 2 young men from a ranch south of town, boys really barely 18 years old. Martha had delivered both of them, she explained, and their mothers were happy to lend them out for a few days of honest labor. We heard you're digging some kind of underground house, said the taller one, whose name was Samuel. That true? It's true. Ma says you're crazy. She's probably right. Samuel grinned. Good. Crazy people are more interesting than normal ones. Show us what to do. They worked for 5 days. Samuel and his companion, a quiet boy named Peter, who rarely spoke, but worked like a machine, cleared more earth in those 5 days than Eleanor had managed in 3 weeks. They hauled timber from the sawmill. They mixed clay and straw for the walls. They built the framework for the shoring that would hold the ceiling in place. And through it all, Eleanor directed them with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, drawing on memories of her father's instructions and prayers that she was remembering correctly. The posts go here 4 feet apart, she said, pointing. And the crossbeams need to be notched so they lock together. If we do it right, the frame will hold even if the earth shifts. You sure about that? Samuel asked. No, but my father was sure, and he kept hundreds of men alive in tunnels twice this deep. I'm trusting his knowledge more than my own. Fair enough. Samuel lifted a timber into place. Your father sounds like he was a smart man. He was the smartest man I ever knew, until the mine collapsed and killed him. Samuel froze. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Why would you? It was 15 years ago and 3,000 miles away. Eleanor picked up a hammer and began driving a peg into place. But he taught me things before he died. Things I'm using now. Things that might save my life and my baby's life. So in a way, he's still keeping people alive, even from the grave. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Samuel nodded slowly and went back to work. On the 5th day, just as the boys were preparing to leave, Jacob Thornton appeared. He rode up to the tunnel entrance and sat on his horse for a long moment, surveying the work. The framework was complete now. The walls were smooth and solid. The chamber was taking shape, 12 feet deep, 10 feet wide, tall enough for a person to stand. I'll be damned, he said finally. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him, leaving the boys to continue their work. Something I can help you with, Mr. Thornton. I came to see if the rumors were true. They said you'd actually made progress. I didn't believe it. And now I'm not sure what to believe. He dismounted and walked past her, ducking into the tunnel without asking permission. She heard his boots on the packed earth, heard the echo of his movements in the growing chamber. When he emerged, his expression had changed. It's warm in there, he said. 55 degrees. Year-round. That's what the earth holds at this depth. How did you know? My father. He was a Cornish miner. He taught me about underground temperatures when I was a child. Thornton stared at her. You've been planning this since you were a child. I've known it was possible since I was a child. I started planning it the day I found out I was pregnant and realized I couldn't survive another winter in that cabin. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more hostile. You're making fools of us. Eleanor blinked. What? You heard me. Everyone in town said this was impossible. Everyone said you'd fail, and now you're proving them wrong, and it's making them angry. I'm not trying to make anyone look foolish. I'm trying to stay alive. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. What matters is what people see, and what they see is a pregnant widow doing something they said couldn't be done. That makes them feel stupid, and people who feel stupid get mean. Is that a warning? It's a fact. Thornton mounted his horse and gathered the reins. You're not safe, Mrs. Harrison. Not from Winter, and not from the people who want you to fail. Watch your back. He rode away without another word. Eleanor watched him go, her heart pounding. What did he mean, people who wanted her to fail? Who would want that? And why? She thought about it all night, lying awake in the cabin while the wind howled and Biscuit snored at her feet. By morning, she had her answer. The answer came in the form of Sheriff Dawson and Reverend Miller riding up to her property just after dawn, with expressions that told her everything she needed to know. Mrs. Harrison, the sheriff said, tipping his hat. We need to talk. About what? There's been a petition, signed by 16 families in town. They're asking me to declare you mentally unfit and remove you from this property for your own safety. The words hit like physical blows. Mentally unfit, Eleanor repeated. That's what they're claiming. They say your behavior, the digging, the refusal to accept help, the isolation proves you're not in your right mind. They want you committed to an institution in Cheyenne until after the baby's born. And then what? They take my baby too. Take my land. The sheriff's jaw tightened. That's not for me to say. Of course it is. You're the law here. You decide what happens to me. The law says I have to investigate claims of mental unfitness. The law says I have to take them seriously. The law says you can take a woman's home and her child because her neighbors don't like seeing her succeed. Now, Mrs. Harrison, Reverend Miller began. Don't you, now Mrs. Harrison me. Eleanor's voice shook with rage. I know what this is. This is Jacob Thornton and his friends trying to steal my land because they're embarrassed that a pregnant widow is doing what they said couldn't be done. This is cowardice dressed up as concern. These are serious accusations, the sheriff said, and that petition is a serious crime. It's fraud. It's theft. It's using the law as a weapon against someone who has done nothing wrong. She was crying now, angry tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Let them see. Let them see what they were doing to her. Sheriff Dawson, I am going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer. Have I broken any law? A pause. No. Have I hurt anyone? No. Have I asked for anything from anyone except to be left alone to work? No, you haven't. Then get off my land, both of you, and tell whoever signed that petition that if they want my home, they'll have to kill me to get it, because I am not leaving. Not now. Not ever. The sheriff held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Reverend, I think we're done here. But the petition is based on nonsense, and we both know it. He turned his horse around. Mrs. Harrison, you have a good day. I won't be back unless someone gives me an actual crime to investigate. He rode away. Reverend Miller hesitated, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then he followed, leaving Eleanor alone with her tears and her rage and the tunnel that might be the only thing standing between her and destruction. She didn't dig that day. She couldn't. Instead, She sat in the chamber she had carved, the chamber they wanted to take from her, and she let herself fall apart. She cried for Daniel dead in a ravine because he'd been trying to provide for a family that would never exist. She cried for her father crushed under 1,000 tons of rock because he'd been trying to earn a living in the only way he knew how. She cried for her brothers who had followed their father into the mines and followed him into death. She cried for her mother, who had died of a broken heart 2 years after losing her husband and sons. She cried for herself, for the girl she'd been, the woman she'd become, the mother she was terrified of being. And when the tears finally stopped, she felt something shift inside her. Not physically. The baby was quiet, sleeping through her mother's breakdown, with the peaceful ignorance of the unborn. But something else. Something deeper. Fear. The fear was still there. It would always be there, but it had been joined by something stronger. Rage. Not the hot, explosive rage that had fueled her confrontation with the sheriff. This was colder, harder, the kind of rage that didn't burn out but burned steady, like coals in a furnace generating heat that could last for years. They wanted her to fail. They were actively working to make her fail, and she was going to prove every single one of them wrong. November came, and with it, the first snow. Eleanor stood at the entrance of her tunnel, her home. She corrected herself, because that's what it was now, and watched the flakes drift down from a gray sky. The shelter was finished. Not perfect, there were 100 things she wanted to improve, to refine, to fix, but finished enough. The chamber was warm, the fireplace worked, the chimney drew smoke up and out, just like her father had taught her. She had a bed against one wall, a small table, and chair shelves for supplies, hooks for hanging herbs and dried meat. She had a home, and in 2 weeks she would have a baby. The contractions started on November 28th, just after midnight. Eleanor had been expecting them for days. The baby had dropped lower in her pelvis. The practice contractions had grown stronger and more frequent. Her body was preparing for the work ahead, whether she was ready or not. "Not yet," she whispered as the first real pain gripped her. "Just a few more hours. Let me send for Martha." But the baby had other plans. The second contraction came 10 minutes later. The third 8 minutes after that. By dawn, they were coming every 5 minutes, and Eleanor knew she didn't have time to send for anyone. She was going to have this baby alone. "Okay," she told herself, breathing through another wave of pain. "Okay, women have been doing this for thousands of years. I can do this. I can—" The contraction peaked and she screamed. Not from pain, though the pain was worse than anything she'd ever experienced, but from fear. From the sudden, overwhelming certainty that she was going to die here in this hole she'd dug for herself, and her baby was going to die with her, and no one would find them until spring. "Please," she gasped, though she didn't know who she was talking to. "Please, help me." The door of the shelter burst open. Martha Brennan stood in the entrance, snow in her hair and fire in her eyes. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't you dare give up now. How did you—" "I told you. I know when pregnant women are in trouble." She crossed to Eleanor's side in 3 quick strides, already rolling up her sleeves. "How far apart?" 5 minutes, maybe less. "Good. That means we have time. Now lie back and let me check you." 12 hours later, in the golden light of a fire that never wavered, Rose Harrison entered the world. She came screaming, angry at being forced out of her warm cocoon, furious at the indignity of being born. Her cries echoed off the earthen walls, filling the chamber with sound and life, and impossible, miraculous hope. "A girl," Martha said, placing the baby on Eleanor's chest. "A perfect, healthy girl, just like you said." Eleanor looked down at her daughter, this tiny, red-faced creature she had built a world to protect, and felt something break inside her. Not break apart, break open. "Rose," she whispered. "Your name is Rose, and you're going to live, no matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does. You're going to live." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, in the warm embrace of the earth, mother and daughter began their life together. But the winter was just beginning. and the real storm was still weeks away. Rose was 3 days old when the first visitor came. Eleanor was nursing the baby by the fire, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever known, when Biscuit's head snapped toward the tunnel entrance. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "Someone's coming?" Eleanor murmured, pulling her shawl closed. "Easy, boy." The knock was hesitant, timid. Nothing like the demanding pounds she'd grown accustomed to from Jacob Thornton and his kind. "Mrs. Harrison, it's Ruth. Ruth Thornton. May I come in?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. Thornton's wife, the woman whose husband had tried to steal her land, her home, her child. What could she possibly want? The door's not locked. Ruth Thornton ducked through the entrance and stopped dead. Her eyes moved across the chamber, taking in the smooth walls, the crackling fire, the warm air that wrapped around her like an embrace. Her mouth fell open. "My God," she breathed. "It's true. It's all true. What did you expect? A muddy hole?" "I didn't know what to expect. Jacob said—" She stopped, started again. "It doesn't matter what Jacob said. I came to apologize. For what you didn't do anything." "That's exactly what I'm apologizing for. I didn't do anything." Ruth's voice cracked. "I knew what they were planning, the petition, the attempt to have you committed. I knew, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself Jacob knew best. I told myself—" She broke off, tears streaming down her face. "I told myself lies, because the truth was too ugly to face." Eleanor watched her for a long moment. This woman had never been cruel to her, not directly. She had simply been absent, silent, complicit in the way that good people are complicit when they choose comfort over courage. "Why are you here now?" Ruth wiped her eyes. "Because my husband came home 3 days ago and told me you'd had your baby alone in a hole in the ground. And I realized that could have been me. If Jacob had died instead of your Daniel. If I'd been the one left pregnant and alone, it could have been me, and nobody would have helped me either. So this is guilt." "Yes, and something else." Ruth reached into the basket she'd been carrying and pulled out a bundle of fabric. Baby clothes. Soft wool, carefully stitched, clearly handmade. "My children have outgrown these. I hoped." Eleanor looked at the clothes, then at Ruth, then at Rose sleeping peacefully at her breast. "What's your daughter's name?" Ruth asked softly. "Rose." "That's beautiful. After someone special. After survival. After hope." Ruth nodded slowly. May I see her?" It was such a simple request, such a human request, the request of a mother who understood what another mother had been through. Eleanor shifted Rose in her arms and held her up. Ruth's face transformed. The guilt and shame melted away, replaced by something pure. Wonder. Joy. The universal recognition of new life. "She's perfect," Ruth whispered. "Absolutely perfect. She's stubborn, cries every 3 hours like clockwork, and refuses to let me sleep. That's how you know she's healthy. The quiet ones are the ones you worry about." For the first time in months, Eleanor felt something ease in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of forgiveness. The door cracking open just enough to let a sliver of light through. "Would you like some tea?" she heard herself ask. Ruth's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I would love some tea." December 5th brought more visitors. Word had spread through the territory like wildfire. The crazy widow had done it. She'd built an underground shelter, survived the construction, given birth alone, and was now living comfortably while everyone else shivered in their drafty cabins. Margaret Foster came first, bringing preserved vegetables and barely concealed envy. "It really is warm in here," she said, her eyes darting around the chamber. "How is that possible? There's no insulation, no proper walls." "The earth is the insulation. At this depth, The ground stays 55 degrees year-round. Add a small fire, and you're warmer than any cabin in the territory. But the engineering, the construction. How did you know how to do all this? My father was a Cornish miner. He taught me. A miner? Margaret's lip curled slightly. I didn't realize you came from mining stock. I come from surviving stock. My people have been going underground to escape what's above for generations. It's in my blood. Margaret left an hour later, her basket empty, her head full of information she would undoubtedly share with everyone in town. Eleanor didn't care. Let them talk. Let them marvel. Let them finally understand that she wasn't crazy. She was prepared. But not everyone who came was friendly. December 8th, just after noon. Eleanor was changing Rose's diaper when she heard voices outside the tunnel. Multiple voices, male voices, and one she recognized immediately. She's in there, I'm telling you, living like some kind of animal. Jacob Thornton. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She wrapped Rose in her blanket and held her close, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Biscuit was already on his feet. Hackles raised a growl, building in his chest. "Stay," she whispered. "Don't make a sound." The voices grew louder, closer. "This is ridiculous," another man said. "You dragged us all the way out here to look at a hole in the ground. It's not just a hole, it's an insult. A pregnant widow showing up every man in the territory, making us look like fools. She's not making anyone look like anything. She's just trying to survive. By proving she's smarter than all of us, by doing what we said couldn't be done." A third voice, older and rougher. "What exactly do you want us to do? Jacob, burn her out. Fill in the tunnel while she's sleeping." Silence. Eleanor stopped breathing. "I didn't say that," Thornton finally muttered. "I just think someone should remind her that she's not as clever as she thinks she is. And how do you propose we do that?" More silence. Then footsteps, coming closer. Eleanor looked around the chamber. One entrance, no exit. If they decided to come in, she had nowhere to run. Her hand found Daniel's rifle, leaning against the wall where she'd kept it since the night she moved in. She'd never fired it, had never even loaded it. But they didn't know that. "Mrs. Harrison," Thornton's voice calling from just outside the entrance. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Eleanor didn't answer. "Come on now. Don't be childish. I brought some men who want to see your little project. They're curious, that's all." Still, she said nothing. Rose stirred in her arms on the verge of waking. If she started crying now... "Fine, if you won't come out, we're coming in." Footsteps in the tunnel, getting closer. Eleanor raised the rifle. The first face that appeared in the doorway was Thornton's. He saw the gun and stopped cold. "Jesus Christ! Get out!" "Now wait just a minute." "I said get out. This is my home. You're trespassing, and I will shoot anyone who takes one more step." Thornton's face went white. "You wouldn't." "Try me." Behind him, she could see two other men, ranch hands from the look of them, their eyes wide with shock. "She's got a gun?" one of them said, backing away. "Jacob, she's got a damn gun." "I can see that," Thornton snarled. "Mrs. Harrison put that down before someone gets hurt. The only person who's going to get hurt is you if you don't leave right now. I'm done asking nicely." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Rose woke up and started crying. It broke the tension like a gunshot. Thornton's eyes went to the baby, this tiny, screaming creature barely a week old, and something shifted in his expression. "Fine," he said, backing away. "Fine. Keep your hole in the ground. See if I care." He retreated through the tunnel. She heard the other men following, heard their horses mounting their hooves, retreating, their voices fading into the distance. Only when silence returned did Eleanor lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "It's okay," she whispered to Rose, rocking her gently. "It's okay. They're gone. We're safe." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Thornton would be back, and next time, he might not come alone. December 12th. A stranger appeared at Eleanor's door. He was old 70, at least maybe older, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen more winters than most people lived through. He didn't knock, just stood at the entrance until Biscuit's barking brought Eleanor to investigate. "You the widow who built this place?" "I am. Who are you?" "Name's Ezekiel Moss. Used to work the California goldfields back before the war. Heard about your tunnel and wanted to see it for myself." Eleanor studied him carefully. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life outdoors and was now paying the price. "Why?" "Because I've been underground more times than I can count, and I've never heard of a woman doing what they say you did." "They say a lot of things about me. Most of it isn't true. I know the difference between gossip and fact." He nodded toward the tunnel entrance. "Mind if I take a look?" She let him in. He moved through the chamber, slowly running his hands along the walls, examining the shoring, studying the fireplace with an expert's eye. When he finally turned back to her, his expression had changed. "Your father was a Cornish miner." It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "The shoring. The angle of the chimney. The way you packed the clay. That's Cornish work. I'd recognize it anywhere." "You knew Cornish miners." "Worked alongside them for 20 years. Best tunnelers in the world. They taught me everything I know." He paused, his eyes going distant. "Most of them are dead now. Collapses, floods, the usual ways the earth takes back what we try to steal from her, but the knowledge lives on." He looked at Eleanor with something like respect. "In people like you." For the first time since Daniel died, Eleanor felt truly seen. Not judged, not pitied, not dismissed. Seen. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. Ezekiel Moss smiled, a rare thing she suspected from a face that had forgotten how. "I would like that very much." They talked for hours. He told her about the gold fields, about the men who had died searching for fortunes they would never find. She told him about her father, about Cornwall, about the journey that had brought her from England to Pennsylvania to Wyoming. They talked about tunnel construction and ventilation systems, and the secrets of keeping Earth from collapsing on your head. And then, as the afternoon light faded and the fire burned low, Ezekiel said something that changed everything. "Something bad is coming." Eleanor looked up from the baby in her arms. "What do you mean?" "I mean a storm. The worst I've felt in 40 years of reading weather." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The animals know it. Haven't you noticed the deer came down from the mountains 3 weeks early? The birds went south before Thanksgiving. Even the ground squirrels are digging deeper than I've ever seen." "Maybe it's just a cold snap." "It's not a cold snap. I can feel it in my bones, in my blood. Something's building out there, something that's going to hit this territory like the fist of God." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "You need to be ready." "I am ready. That's why I built this place." "You're ready to survive. But are you ready for what comes after?" "I don't understand." Ezekiel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "When this storm hits, people are going to die. A lot of people. And the ones who survive are going to need help. They're going to come looking for shelter, for warmth, for anyone who knows how to keep them alive." He gestured at the chamber around them. "This place can hold more than just you and your baby. When the time comes, you're going to have to decide who you're willing to save." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor thought about Jacob Thornton, who had tried to steal her home. About Margaret Foster, who had mocked her every step of the way. About all the people in town who had signed that petition, who had wanted her committed, who had prayed for her failure. "What if I don't want to save them?" "That's your choice. But I'll tell you something. My grandmother told me back when I was young and stupid and thought revenge was the same thing as justice." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "The earth doesn't care about grudges. She only cares about who's smart enough to listen to her warnings. You listened. Most of them didn't. And when the storm comes, you'll have to decide if that makes them your enemies or just people who made a terrible mistake." He left an hour later, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a ghost. Eleanor stood at the tunnel entrance for a long time after he was gone, watching the clouds build on the horizon and wondering if he was right. December 18th. Ruth Thornton returned, but this time she wasn't alone. Her 2 children were with her, a boy of 8 named Thomas and a girl of 6 named Emma, along with her sister-in-law Mary and Mary's infant son. "I need to ask you something," Ruth said, her voice tight with barely contained panic. "And I need you to be honest with me." "What is it?" "That old prospector who visited you last week, Ezekiel Moss. He came to our ranch yesterday. He told Jacob that a terrible storm was coming, the worst in living memory. He said we needed to prepare, that our house wouldn't survive, that we should start digging underground shelters of our own." "What did Jacob say?" Ruth's face twisted with frustration. "He laughed. Called Moss a crazy old fool. Said he'd survived plenty of winters without hiding in a hole and he wasn't about to start now." "And you?" "I believe him. I believe Moss." Ruth's eyes were desperate. "I've felt it too, Eleanor. Something in the air. Something wrong. My bones have been aching for weeks, and they only ache like that when bad weather's coming. What do you want from me?" The question came out harsher than Eleanor intended. Ruth flinched. "I want to know if you'll help us. If the storm comes and our house doesn't hold, I want to know if there's a place we can go. If there's someone who won't turn us away." Eleanor looked at Ruth. At her children, who were staring at the underground chamber with wide, curious eyes. At Mary, who was clutching her baby with the same desperate protectiveness that Eleanor felt for Rose. She thought about Jacob Thornton, about the petition, about the gun she'd had to point at his face to make him leave. She thought about what Ezekiel Moss had said, "The earth doesn't care about grudges." "If the storm comes," Eleanor said slowly, "and you need shelter, come here. Bring your children. Bring your sister. I won't turn you away." Ruth burst into tears. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve—" "No, you don't. But your children do. And that's enough." December 24th. Christmas Eve. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 6 hours. Eleanor woke to frost on the inside of her tunnel entrance, something that had never happened before. The fire was burning strong, but the cold was pressing in from outside, with a force that felt almost physical. She bundled Rose in every blanket she owned and checked her supplies for the 20th time. Food for a month, water from the spring that never froze, firewood stacked along the walls, candles, lamp oil, everything she needed to survive. But would it be enough? Ezekiel's warning echoed in her mind. Something bad is coming. She could feel it now, the pressure in the air, the strange silence outside, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Biscuit wouldn't leave her side. Every few minutes he would lift his head and whine a sound she had never heard him make before. "I know, boy," she murmured, stroking his fur. "I feel it too." That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire with Rose in her arms, watching the flames and waiting for something she couldn't name. At midnight, the wind started to rise. December 31st, New Year's Eve. The wind had been blowing for a week straight. Not the gentle Wyoming wind that Eleanor had grown accustomed to. This was something else. Something angry. Something that screamed and howled and threw itself against the hillside, as if trying to tear the earth apart. But the shelter held. The temperature outside dropped to 20 below zero, 30 below, 40. Inside, Eleanor kept the fire burning and the chamber stayed warm. She celebrated New Year's Eve alone with her daughter, singing softly to the baby, while the world outside descended into frozen chaos.
"This is just the beginning," she whispered to Rose. "Isn't it?"
The baby gurgled and grabbed at Eleanor's finger. Outside, the wind screamed louder. January 5th, 1888. The temperature rose. It happened suddenly and possibly a warm front sweeping through the territory like a false spring. The wind died. The sun came out. The ice began to melt. Eleanor stepped outside for the first time in days and felt the warmth on her face. Something was wrong. This didn't feel like relief. It felt like a trap. She found Ezekiel Moss waiting at the edge of her property, mounted on a horse that looked as ancient as he did. "You feel it," he said. "Yes." The calm before the storm. The eye of the hurricane. When? Days. Maybe less. His voice was grave. "This is it, Mrs. Harrison. The big one. The storm that's going to separate the living from the dead. What should I do? What you've already done. Stay underground. Don't come out no matter what you hear. And when people start showing up at your door..." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "Remember what I told you. About grudges. About choices." He turned his horse and started to ride away. "Wait," Eleanor called. "Where will you be? Will you be safe?" He looked back over his shoulder. "I've got a place. Not as good as yours, but good enough for an old man who's lived too long already." He smiled that rare, cracked smile. "You take care of that baby, Mrs. Harrison. She's going to do great things someday. I can feel it." Then, he was gone. January 11th. The sky turned yellow. Eleanor had never seen anything like it. The clouds hung low and heavy, the color of old bruises, and the air had a weight to it that made her chest feel tight. Biscuit refused to go outside. He cowered in the corner of the chamber, whimpering. Rose was fussy, crying for hours without explanation, as if she could sense what was coming. Eleanor barred the door from the inside, checked her supplies one last time, added extra wood to the fire. Then she sat down to wait. The waiting was the hardest part. She thought about her father trapped in that Pennsylvania mine 15 years ago. Had he known he was going to die? Had there been a moment before the ceiling came down when he realized that everything he'd taught his children about survival was going to be put to the test in ways he couldn't imagine? She thought about Daniel falling into that ravine. Had he thought of her as he fell? Had he known that he was leaving her alone with a baby she didn't even know she was carrying? She thought about Rose, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, unaware that the world outside was about to end. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Eleanor whispered. "No matter what, no matter who comes, no matter what they've done, I'm going to keep you alive." It was a promise, a vow, a prayer. January 12th, 1888. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The storm hit. One moment there was silence. The next the world exploded. The wind came first, a roar so loud that Eleanor thought the hillside was collapsing. Then the cold seeping through the door, despite the bar, despite the packed clay, despite everything she'd done to seal the entrance. Then the screaming. Not the wind. Human screaming. Somewhere out there in the white chaos of the storm, someone was dying. Eleanor pressed her hands over her ears and squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't help them. Not now. Not in this. All she could do was survive, and pray that when the storm passed, there would be someone left to save. The screaming stopped after an hour. Eleanor didn't know if that meant the person had found shelter or had frozen to death. She didn't want to know. Rose was crying, disturbed by the howling wind and the pressure and her mother's fear. Eleanor held her close and rocked her and sang the songs her father had taught her, Cornish songs about miners, and the sea songs about going underground and coming back into the light. "Hal and tow," she sang, her voice cracking. "Jolly rumbelow, we were up long before the day-o, to welcome in the summer, to welcome in the May-o, for summer is a-coming in and winter's gone away-o." The wind screamed in response, but inside the shelter the fire burned steady. and Eleanor Harrison held her daughter and waited for the end of the world. 3 hours after the storm began, the first knock came. 3 hours after the storm began, the first knock came. Eleanor's heart stopped. The sound was barely audible over the howling wind, a weak, desperate rhythm that could have been mistaken for debris striking the door. But Biscuit knew the difference. He was on his feet instantly, barking, his tail tucked between his legs. "Quiet," Eleanor hissed. "Quiet, boy." The knock came again, harder this time, more urgent. "Please." A voice thin and broken, fighting through the wind. "Please, for the love of God, let us in." Eleanor grabbed Daniel's rifle and approached the door. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Who's there?" "Henderson, James Henderson, my wife, my daughter. Please, we're dying out here." The Hendersons. Eleanor knew them. They lived 4 miles north, a quiet family who had never been cruel to her, but had never helped her either. James had signed that petition. His name had been third on the list. She hesitated. "Please." The voice cracked with desperation. "My daughter is 6 years old. She's not moving anymore. Please." Eleanor closed her eyes. The earth doesn't care about grudges. She unbarred the door. The wind hit her like a physical force, ripping the breath from her lungs and slamming ice crystals into her face. Through the white chaos, she could barely make out 3 figures huddled in the tunnel entrance shapes that looked more like snowmen than human beings. "Get inside, now." They stumbled through. Eleanor slammed the door shut and threw her weight against it, fighting the wind that seemed determined to follow them in. The bar slid into place with a thunk that echoed off the earthen walls. Then she turned around. The Hendersons were collapsed on the floor, so covered in snow and ice that she couldn't tell where their clothes ended and the frost began. James was clutching his wife, Sarah, who was clutching their daughter, Emma. None of them were moving. "Are they alive?" Eleanor whispered. James's eyes opened. They were bloodshot, half frozen, but alive. "Emma," he croaked. "Check Emma. She stopped shivering an hour ago." Eleanor's blood went cold. She knew what that meant. When someone stopped shivering, it meant their body had given up trying to fight the cold. It meant they were dying. She crossed to the little girl and pressed her fingers against her neck. A pulse. Weak. Thready. But there. She's alive. Barely. Eleanor was already moving, grabbing blankets, stoking the fire, filling a pot with water from the spring. "We need to warm her slowly, too fast, and her heart could stop." "How do you know that?" "My father was a miner. Men got hypothermia all the time underground." She wrapped Emma in the warmest blanket she had and held her close to the fire, close enough to feel the heat, not close enough to burn. "Talk to her. Keep talking. Don't let her slip away." Sarah Henderson crawled across the floor to her daughter, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Emma. Emma, baby, can you hear me? Mama's here. Mama's got you. You're safe now, baby. You're safe." The little girl's eyelids fluttered. "Mama." Sarah sobbed, a raw, broken sound that echoed off the walls. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Eleanor turned to James, who was still lying on the floor, his face gray with exhaustion. "What happened?" "The roof." His voice was barely a whisper. "The wind took it. Just ripped it off like paper. 1 minute we were huddled by the fire, the next minute the sky was falling in. We had to run." "How did you find this place?" "The smoke. From your chimney. We saw it through the white." He coughed, a wet sound that worried Eleanor. "We followed it. 3 miles. Maybe more. I don't know how we made it. I kept thinking we were going to die. I kept thinking—" He broke off, his eyes finding hers. "I signed that petition, the one that was supposed to take your home away." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" "You didn't think a pregnant widow knew anything worth knowing. You didn't think I deserved to make my own choices. You thought I was crazy, and you wanted someone else to deal with me." James flinched as if she'd struck him. "Yes," he said. "All of that. And I was wrong." I was wrong about everything." Eleanor looked at him. This man who had tried to destroy her now lying on her floor, begging for the shelter he had said would fail. "Get warm," she said finally. "We'll talk about the rest later." If there was a later. January 12th. 6 hours into the storm. The second knock came just as Eleanor was starting to believe they might actually survive the night. This time the voice was familiar. "Eleanor. Eleanor, it's Ruth. Please let us in." Eleanor threw open the door without hesitation. Ruth Thornton stumbled through, clutching her 2 children to her chest. Thomas and Emma, the same ages as her own siblings had been when they died in that Pennsylvania mine. Behind Ruth came Mary Jacobs' sister carrying her infant son. "Thank God!" Ruth gasped, collapsing against the wall. "Thank God you're alive. Thank God this place is real. Where's Jacob?" Ruth's face crumbled. "He wouldn't come. He said he'd rather freeze than hide in a hole built by a crazy woman. He said—" She choked on a sob. "He said if I left I shouldn't bother coming back. You left him. I chose my children." Ruth's voice hardened with a determination Eleanor recognized. "He can call me whatever he wants. He can hate me for the rest of his life. But I will not let my babies die because of his pride." Eleanor counted heads. The Hendersons, Ruth and her children, Mary and her baby, plus herself and Rose. 10 people, in a shelter built for one. "We're going to need more blankets," she said. January 12th. 9 hours into the storm. The temperature inside the chamber had dropped 15 degrees since the Hendersons arrived. Every time the door opened, more heat escaped. Every body that entered brought snow and ice that melted into puddles on the floor. The fire was burning through wood twice as fast as Eleanor had planned, and she was starting to do the math in her head. How many days could they survive? How many mouths to feed? How much water? How much fuel? Stop! Eleanor looked up. Martha Brennan was standing over her. The old midwife had arrived an hour ago, half frozen and fully furious. "Stop what?" "Stop calculating. I can see it in your eyes. You're trying to figure out if you made a mistake letting us in. I'm trying to figure out how to keep everyone alive." "Same thing." Martha sat down beside her, joints creaking. "Listen to me. You built this place to survive. Not to be comfortable. Not to be easy. To survive. And that's what we're going to do. There are 10 people in here. 10. I have food for 1. Maybe 2 if I stretch it. Then we'll stretch it further. We'll ration. We'll make do." Martha's eyes were fierce. "I've survived things you can't imagine, girl. Famines, epidemics, wars. This is just weather. Weather passes. People endure. And if someone dies, then we'll mourn them and keep going. That's what humans do. That's what we've always done." A cry cut through the chamber. Not Rose. Not Emma Henderson. A different baby. Mary's son, Michael. "He's hungry." Mary said, her voice tight with panic. "I don't have enough milk. The cold, the stress, I'm running dry." Eleanor looked at Rose sleeping peacefully in her cradle, then at Michael red-faced and screaming with hunger. "I have enough for 2, she said quietly. "Bring him here." Mary stared at her. "You would do that, feed my baby when you barely know me. Your baby is hungry. My baby is fed. It's not complicated." Mary burst into tears. "I called you crazy," she whispered. "When Jacob was ranting about you, I agreed with everything he said. I thought you were mad. I thought this place would collapse and kill you, and everyone would say I told you so. And now? Now I think you're the sanest person I've ever met, and the rest of us were the crazy ones." Eleanor took Michael from Mary's arms and held him to her breast. "Crazy is relative," she said. "What matters is who survives." January 12th. 14 hours into the storm. The third knock was the one Eleanor had been dreading. "Eleanor!" A voice hoarse and broken. "Eleanor, please!" Jacob Thornton. The room went silent. Ruth's face drained of color. Mary grabbed her baby and pressed against the wall. Even the children seemed to sense that something had changed.
Don't, Ruth whispered. Eleanor, please, don't open that door. He's your husband. He's the man who tried to destroy you, who tried to take your home, who chose his pride over his children's lives. Ruth's voice was shaking. He deserves to freeze out there. Maybe he does. Eleanor walked to the door. What are you doing? What I have to do. She unbarred the door. Jacob Thornton fell into the chamber like a corpse. His face was blue-white, his lips cracked and bleeding, his eyes barely focused. Ice crystals clung to his eyebrows, his beard, his hair. He looked like death itself had chewed him up and spit him out. You came, he whispered. I didn't come. You did. I just opened the door. I didn't think you would, after everything I did, after everything I said. Eleanor looked down at him. This man who had mocked her, threatened her, tried to steal everything she had. This man who was now lying at her feet powerless, helpless, completely at her mercy. I should let you die, she said. Every rational part of me says I should throw you back into that storm and let nature finish what your pride started. Then why didn't you? Because my daughter is watching. Jacob's eyes moved to Rose's cradle, to the tiny face peering out from the blankets, to the new life that Eleanor had built this whole shelter to protect. She's beautiful, he said, and his voice cracked. Yes, she is. And I'm going to raise her to be better than us, better than me, better than you, better than everyone who told me I couldn't do what I did. Eleanor grabbed a blanket and threw it at him. Get warm. Stay quiet. And if you cause any trouble, I will personally drag you back outside and leave you for the wolves. I understand. No, you don't. But you will. She turned her back on him and returned to her daughter. Behind her, Ruth Thornton stared at her husband like he was a stranger. He stared back the same way. January 13th. 26 hours into the storm. The screaming started just after midnight. Not the wind, though the wind was still howling like a living thing. Not the children, though they were restless and scared. This was a different kind of scream. Raw, primal. The sound of someone losing their grip on sanity. It was James Henderson. We're going to die in here, he shouted, lurching to his feet and stumbling toward the door. We're buried alive. We're going to suffocate. We have to get out. James, no! Sarah grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. Can't breathe. Can't think. The walls are closing in. Let me out. Let me out. He reached for the bar on the door. Eleanor moved faster than she'd ever moved in her life. The crack of her palm against his face echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. James staggered backward, his hand pressed to his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. Sit down, Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, deadly calm. Sit down and breathe. You hit me. I'll hit you again if you try to open that door. There are 10 people in here whose lives depend on that door staying closed, including your wife, including your daughter. If you can't control yourself, I will control you. I can't breathe. Yes, you can. The ventilation system is working. Fresh air is coming in through channels I carved into the ceiling. You're not suffocating. You're panicking. And panic will kill you faster than the cold ever could. James was trembling. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked like a man who had been pushed past every limit he thought he had. How do you do it? He whispered. How are you so calm? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. I've been terrified since the moment this storm started. But terror is a luxury I can't afford right now, so I'm putting it in a box and dealing with it later. She grabbed his shoulders and forced him to look at her. You can fall apart when this is over. I promise you when the storm passes, I will personally give you permission to scream and cry and lose your mind. But not now. Not yet. Right now, I need you to hold yourself together. Can you do that? James took a shuddering breath. Then another. Then another. Yes, he said finally. Yes, I can do that. Good. Now sit with your daughter. She needs her father to be strong. He nodded and moved to Emma's side, gathering her into his arms. Eleanor turned around to find every eye in the chamber fixed on her. "What?" she demanded. Martha Brennan smiled that rare, precious smile. "Nothing. Just watching a leader being born." January 13th. 32 hours into the storm. The food ran out faster than Eleanor had calculated. Not because people were eating too much. Everyone understood the need to ration, but because there were simply too many mouths. The dried meat was gone. The flour was gone. The preserved vegetables were nearly depleted. "We have enough for maybe 2 more days," Eleanor told Martha quietly. "After that, we start getting weak. After a week, we start dying." "The storm won't last a week." "How do you know?" "Because no storm in the history of this territory has lasted more than 4 days. And because if I'm wrong, knowing won't help us anyway." It was cold logic. The kind of logic that came from decades of facing impossible odds and somehow surviving. What do we do until then? We wait. We conserve energy. We tell stories to keep the children calm. We survive. Martha paused. "And we pray." "I don't know if I believe in prayer anymore." "Then pray anyway. It gives people something to do with their hands." That night, Ruth Thornton led the group in the Lord's Prayer. Even Jacob joined in, his voice hoarse and broken, but present. Eleanor didn't pray. She held Rose and listened to the wind, and wondered if any God was listening at all. January 14th, 50 hours into the storm. Tommy Wheeler arrived at dawn. Eleanor heard the pounding through the howl of the wind, weak, intermittent, barely distinguishable from the chaos outside. But she knew what it was. She knew it the way she knew the weight of her daughter in her arms. Someone else was dying out there. She opened the door and found the young ranch hand collapsed in the tunnel entrance, more ice than man. He'd lost his hat somewhere in the storm. His hair was frozen solid. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. "Help me!" Eleanor shouted. "Help me get him inside!" Jacob Thornton was the first to respond. He grabbed Tommy's arms while Eleanor grabbed his legs, and together they hauled him into the chamber. The door slammed shut behind them. "Tommy!" Jacob was slapping the boy's face, trying to get a response. "Tommy, can you hear me? It's Mr. Thornton. You're safe now. You're safe." Tommy's eyes fluttered open. "The cattle," he whispered. "All dead. Froze standing up. I tried to save them. I tried—" "Forget the cattle. You're alive. That's all that matters." "The others, the search party. We got separated. I don't know where they are. I don't know if—" His eyes rolled back, and he went limp. "Is he dead?" Ruth asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor pressed her fingers to Tommy's neck. "No, just unconscious. His body's shutting down to conserve energy." She looked at Jacob. "We need to warm him. Slowly. The same way we did with Emma Henderson." Jacob nodded and started stripping off Tommy's frozen clothes. It was the first time he and Eleanor had worked together on anything. It wouldn't be the last. January 14th, 60 hours into the storm. 11 people now. 11 souls crammed into a space meant for one. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. The children were crying. The adults were snapping at each other. The walls seemed to press closer with every passing hour. And still the wind screamed. "I can't do this anymore." Mary whimpered, clutching Michael to her chest. "I can't. It's too much. It's too small. I need to get out. I need air." "There's air," Eleanor said. "The ventilation is working." "Not that kind of air. Real air. Outside air. I need to see the sky." "If you go outside, you'll die." "Maybe that's better than this. Maybe—" "Stop." The voice was Jacob's. Everyone turned to look at him. He was sitting against the wall, his face haggard, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who had been broken and was slowly trying to put the pieces back together. "I know this is hard," he said. "I know it feels impossible.
But we're alive. Do you understand that we're alive and hundreds of people out there aren't? Every minute we spend in here is a minute we get to keep breathing. Every hour is a gift." "A gift?" Mary laughed bitterly. "You call this a gift?" "Yes, because 2 days ago, I was ready to let my family die, rather than ask for help from a woman I'd wronged. I was so proud, so stubborn, so convinced that I knew better than everyone else that I almost killed the people I love most in the world." He looked at Ruth, at his children, at Eleanor. "This place saved my life. This woman saved my life. And I'm going to spend every day I have left trying to deserve that salvation." The chamber went quiet. Mary's sobs subsided. The children stopped crying. Even the wind seemed to pause for a moment as if listening. "Well," Martha Brennan said into the silence, "I never thought I'd see the day Jacob Thornton admitted he was wrong about something." "Neither did I," Ruth said softly. "Neither did I." January 15th, 72 hours into the storm. On the morning of the third day, the wind stopped. Eleanor didn't notice at first. She was half asleep, Rose nestled against her chest, her body so exhausted that consciousness felt like a distant concept. But then Biscuit raised his head. His ears perked up, his tail began to wag. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor murmured. Silence. Not the muffled silence of the storm where the wind's howl was so constant it became background noise. Real silence. Complete silence. The silence of a world holding its breath. Eleanor sat up slowly. Around her the others were stirring. James Henderson, Sarah, Ruth, Jacob, Tommy Wheeler, still weak but alive, Martha Brennan, who had barely slept in 3 days. Mary and the children tangled together in a pile of blankets. "Is it over?" Thomas Thornton whispered. He was 8 years old and had been brave beyond his years. "Is the storm done?" "I don't know," Eleanor said. "Let me check." She crossed to the door, paused, took a breath. Then she unbarred it and pushed it open. Light. Pure, brilliant, blinding light. Eleanor stumbled into the tunnel entrance and shielded her eyes. The sun was rising over a world she didn't recognize. A world buried under mountains of snow sculpted into alien shapes by wind that had blown without mercy for 3 days. The temperature was still cold. Brutally cold. But the killing wind was gone. "It's over," she breathed. "It's actually over." Behind her she heard Ruth start to cry. James Henderson dropped to his knees and began praying. Jacob Thornton put his arm around his wife and pulled her close. And 11 people who had survived the impossible stepped out of the earth and into the light of a new day. But the world they emerged into was not the world they had left. The Henderson farm was gone. Not damaged. Gone. Where their house had stood, there was only a snowdrift 15 feet high. The Thornton ranch was destroyed. The main house had lost its roof. The barn had collapsed entirely. Dead cattle dotted the landscape like frozen statues. And everywhere, the signs of death. A wagon half buried in snow with shapes inside that weren't moving. A horse frozen solid while still standing, its eyes open and glazed with ice. A child's mitten lying in the snow with no child attached to it. "Oh God," Ruth whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "Don't look," Jacob said, pulling her close. "Don't look. Just keep walking." But they all looked. They couldn't help it. Because what they were seeing wasn't just destruction. It was massacre. It was apocalypse. It was the world they knew being erased and replaced with something out of a nightmare. "How many?" Eleanor asked quietly. "How many do you think are dead?" Martha Brennan's face was gray. "Hundreds," she said. "Maybe more. The whole territory. Everyone who wasn't underground. Everyone who didn't have shelter. We have to help them, the survivors, There must be survivors. There will be, but right now we have to take care of ourselves first. Get warm, get fed, get strong. Martha gripped Eleanor's arm. You did something extraordinary here. You saved 11 lives. But the work isn't over. It's just beginning. Eleanor looked back at her shelter, the hole in the hillside, that everyone had mocked, that everyone had said would fail, that had become an ark in a flood of ice and death. Then she looked at the people she had saved. The Hendersons holding each other like they might fly apart if they let go. Ruth and Jacob Thornton, their children pressed between them. Tommy Wheeler, weak but alive. Mary and her baby. Martha Brennan already thinking about what came next. And Rose, her daughter, her reason for everything. Let's go inside, Eleanor said. We have work to do. One by one they filed back into the earth. The sun continued to rise over a world that had been changed forever. And somewhere in that world, the story of Eleanor Harrison, the crazy widow who dug herself into a mountain and saved everyone who had mocked her, was just beginning to spread. January 15th, 10 o'clock in the morning. The first body they found was Reverend Miller. He was frozen solid in the snow 300 yards from Eleanor's shelter, his hand still reaching toward the smoke from her chimney. He had been so close, so impossibly close. Another 10 minutes of walking, and he would have survived. Jacob Thornton dropped to his knees beside the body. He came to my house first, Jacob said, his voice hollow. The morning of the storm. He wanted to warn me. Told me Ezekiel Moss had been right, that something terrible was coming. I laughed at him. Told him to stop listening to crazy old men and crazy widows. Jacob. He left. Said he was going to check on the other families. Make sure everyone was prepared. Jacob's voice cracked. He died trying to save people. And the last thing I said to him was that he was a fool. Eleanor stood behind him. Rose bundled against her chest, watching the man who had been her enemy grieve for the man he had dismissed. We need to keep moving, she said quietly. There might be others. Survivors. What's the point? Everyone's dead. You don't know that. I didn't know 11 people would show up at my door during the storm, but they did. Hope isn't logical, Mr. Thornton. It doesn't follow rules. It just exists. Jacob looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. How do you do it? How do you keep hoping after everything you've lost? Eleanor thought about Daniel, about her father, about her brothers and her mother, and everyone she had ever loved who was now bones in the ground. Because the alternative is giving up, and I didn't dig myself into a mountain just to give up on the other side. She held out her hand. Jacob stared at it for a long moment. Then he took it and let her pull him to his feet. Let's go find the living, Eleanor said. We can bury the dead later. January 15th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They found the Patterson family huddled in what was left of their barn. 5 people. A father, a mother, 3 children under 10. They had survived by burrowing into a haystack when their house collapsed, letting the hay insulate them from the killing cold. We heard voices, Mr. Patterson gasped when Eleanor's group reached them. We thought we were hallucinating, thought the cold had finally taken our minds. You're alive, Eleanor said, checking the children for signs of frostbite. That's not hallucination, that's survival. Our house is gone, everything we own, 18 years of work just gone. Houses can be rebuilt, lives can't. She looked at Mrs. Patterson, who was clutching her youngest child with the desperate grip of a woman who had come too close to losing everything. Can you walk? I think so. Then come with us. We have shelter, food, warmth. Where? The crazy widow's hole in the ground, Jacob Thornton said. There was no mockery in his voice now, only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. Turns out it's the only thing in this territory that survived the storm intact. The Pattersons stared at Eleanor. You're her, Mr. Patterson said. The woman who dug the underground shelter. The one everyone said was mad. I'm her. We signed that petition.
The one that was supposed to have you committed. I know. Your name was 7th on the list. Patterson flinched. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We didn't know. We didn't understand. No, you didn't. Eleanor turned and started walking. But you can learn. Come on. We have a long way to go and the temperature's dropping. January 15th. 6 o'clock in the evening. 16 people now. Eleanor's shelter was never meant to hold 16 people. It was barely meant to hold one. But somehow, impossibly, they made it work. Bodies pressed against bodies. Children slept in shifts, trading space on the bed like currency. The fire burned constantly, fed by wood that was running dangerously low. The air grew thick and close-heavy, with the breath of too many people in too small a space. But they were alive. We need to organize, Martha Brennan announced that evening. We can't keep operating like this. If we're going to survive the next few weeks, we need structure, roles, rules. What kind of rules? James Henderson asked. Food rationing, water management, waste disposal, sleep schedules. Everything that keeps a group of people from tearing each other apart when they're trapped in close quarters. Who put you in charge? Nobody. I'm suggesting it because I'm the oldest person here, and I've survived more disasters than the rest of you combined. But if someone else wants the job, they're welcome to it. Silence. That's what I thought. Martha turned to Eleanor. You built this place. You know its limits better than anyone. What do we need? Eleanor had been thinking about this since the first refugees arrived, running the numbers in her head, calculating the impossible arithmetic of survival. We have enough food for 3 days if we ration carefully. Water isn't a problem, the spring keeps flowing no matter what. Wood is critical. We're burning through it twice as fast as I planned, and we can't go far from the shelter to gather more until the temperature stabilizes. What about the other farms, the other houses? Destroyed most of them, but there might be supplies in the wreckage. Preserved food, fuel, tools. She paused. Bodies. The word hung in the air like smoke. Someone has to go look, Eleanor continued. Search parties, small groups who can move fast and get back before dark. I'll go, Jacob said immediately. No, you're still recovering from hypothermia. You'd slow us down. Then who? Eleanor looked around the chamber. At the faces of people who had mocked her, doubted her, tried to destroy her. People who were now looking at her for leadership because she was the only one who had known what to do. I'll go, she said. Tommy Wheeler, you're with me. James Henderson, you too if you're up for it. What about Rose? Ruth asked. You can't leave her. I'm leaving her with you. You've nursed 4 children. You know what to do. But this isn't a discussion. We need supplies. I know this land better than anyone here, and if I don't come back... She met Ruth's eyes. Then you raise my daughter and you tell her that her mother died trying to keep people alive. The same people who tried to take her home. Ruth's face crumpled. I'll take care of her, she whispered. I swear it. On my life. Good. Eleanor handed Rose to Ruth and picked up Daniel's rifle. We leave at first light. January 16th. 8 o'clock in the morning. The search party set out into a world that looked like the surface of the moon. Snow was piled higher than Eleanor's head in places sculpted into drifts and ridges and impossible shapes by wind that had blown for 3 days without stopping. The temperature was 15 below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, but nothing like the killing cold of the storm itself. Which way? Tommy Wheeler asked. He was still pale, still weak, but he had insisted on coming. Which farm first? The Miller place. It's closest. That's where Reverend Miller lived. I know. They walked in silence for a long time. The snow crunched under their boots. The sun glared off the white landscape so brightly that Eleanor's eyes watered. Can I ask you something? Tommy said finally. Go ahead. When I showed up at your door during the storm, I was sure I was going to die. I'd been walking for hours.
I couldn't feel my hands or my feet. I thought if I could just see another human face before I went, that would be enough. But you didn't die. No, because you opened the door. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Why, after everything Mr. Thornton did to you, after everything we all did, why did you let any of us in? Eleanor thought about the question. It was a fair question. A question she had asked herself 100 times during those 3 endless days. Because my father taught me something when I was a little girl, she said. He said the earth doesn't care about grudges. She only cares about who's smart enough to listen to her warnings. He said that holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. That's wisdom. That's survival. Hate takes energy. Energy I couldn't spare. She started walking again. Come on, we're wasting daylight. The Miller house was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. Where it had stood, there was only a crater of snow, as if the storm had reached down and scooped the building off the face of the earth. Jesus, James Henderson breathed. It's just gone. The foundation might still be there, under the snow. Eleanor was already calculating. If the cellar held, there could be supplies, preserved food, maybe fuel. How do we get to it? We dig. It took 2 hours to reach the cellar door. Eleanor's arms were screaming by the time she cleared the last of the snow. Her back felt like it was made of broken glass. But when she wrenched the door open and saw what was inside, every ounce of pain was worth it. Jars, dozens of jars. Preserved vegetables, pickled meat, jams and jellies, and everything a minister's wife had put up for the winter. This could feed us for weeks. James said, his voice hushed with wonder. This could save our lives. Eleanor started loading jars into her pack. Take everything you can carry. We'll come back for the rest. They found more at the Henderson farm, at the Patterson place, at 3 other homesteads where the owners were dead, but their supplies remained. By the time they returned to Eleanor's shelter that evening, they had enough food to last a month. But they had also found 9 more bodies. January 16th, 8 o'clock in the evening. The survivors gathered that night to count the dead. Reverend Miller. The Olson family, all 4 of them. Old Mr. Hawkins, who had lived alone at the edge of town. The Crawford baby, only 6 months old. Sheriff Dawson found frozen at his desk, apparently trying to organize a rescue party that never launched. That's 13, Martha Brennan said quietly. 13 that we know of. There will be more. How many people lived in this territory before the storm? Eleanor asked. About 200, maybe a little more. And how many have we accounted for, living or dead? 47, which means more than 150 are still unaccounted for. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. They could be alive, Ruth said desperately. They could have found shelter somewhere. Another cellar? A cave? Something? Some of them, maybe, but not all. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. This storm was unlike anything we've ever seen. The temperature dropped to 40 below. The wind was strong enough to tear roofs off houses. Anyone caught outside for more than a few minutes would have died. Anyone in a house that couldn't hold the heat would have died. Anyone without enough fuel to keep a fire burning for 3 days would have died. So we're the lucky ones. No, we're the ones who found shelter in time. Luck had nothing to do with it. Martha looked at Eleanor. Preparation did. Foresight. The willingness to do something everyone said was crazy because you knew that it was the only way to survive. I didn't know anything, Eleanor said. I hoped, I gambled, I could have been wrong. But you weren't. And that's why we're alive. January 17th, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The territorial marshal arrived with a rescue party from Cheyenne. 20 men on horseback loaded with supplies and medical equipment picking their way through the devastated landscape with expressions of horror on their faces. Dear God, the marshal said when he saw what remained of the town. It's worse than the reports said. The reports don't know the half of it.
Jacob Thornton replied. He had appointed himself the liaison with the rescue party, a role Eleanor was happy to let him take. We've found 13 bodies so far. We expect to find many more. How many survivors? 16 at last count, most of them sheltering in Mrs. Harrison's underground home. The marshal's eyes widened. The underground shelter that actually worked. Worked. It's the only thing that did work. Every house, every barn, every structure above ground was either destroyed or compromised. The only people who survived in this area are the ones who made it to that shelter. I need to see it. Eleanor led him to the tunnel entrance. He ducked through the doorway and emerged 5 minutes later with a look of astonishment on his face. This is remarkable. The temperature in there must be 50 degrees warmer than outside. 55 degrees year-round naturally. Add a fire and it goes up to 70. And you built this yourself while pregnant, with help toward the end. But yes, mostly myself. The marshal stared at her for a long moment. Mrs. Harrison, I've been a lawman for 30 years. I've seen people do incredible things to survive things that would make your hair stand on end. But I've never seen anything like this. He shook his head slowly. The governor is going to want to hear about this. The newspapers too. You may have just saved more lives than you know. I saved 11. That's all I know for certain. For now. But when word spreads about what you built, about how it works, about the fact that it survived when nothing else did. He paused. You're going to teach people, aren't you? Show them how to build these shelters for themselves. Eleanor hadn't thought that far ahead. She had been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that the idea of a future beyond the immediate crisis hadn't fully formed in her mind. I suppose I could, she said slowly. If people wanted to learn? Oh, they'll want to learn. The marshal laughed grimly. After what just happened, they'll be lining up at your door. January 18th, 10 o'clock in the morning. The first student arrived before Eleanor had even finished breakfast. His name was Thomas Green, a farmer from 20 miles south whose family had survived the storm by pure luck. Their house happened to be built in a natural hollow that blocked the worst of the wind. I heard about your shelter, he said, standing at the entrance with his hat in his hands. The one you dug into the hill. I heard it saved 11 lives. It did. I want to build one. On my land. For my family. He met Eleanor's eyes with a desperation she recognized. I have 4 children, Mrs. Harrison. 4. And for 3 days I thought I was going to watch them freeze to death because I didn't have anywhere safe to put them. I never want to feel that way again. It's not easy. The work is backbreaking. It takes months. I don't care. I'll work as long as it takes. I'll do whatever you tell me. Just teach me how. Eleanor looked at this man, this stranger who had traveled 20 miles through a frozen wasteland to ask for her help. A man who had never mocked her, never doubted her, never tried to take her home. Come inside, she said. I'll show you the diagrams. January 19th. Throughout the day. More came. By the end of the second day, after the marshal's visit, Eleanor had 17 students. By the end of the week, she had 43. They came from all over the territory, farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, tradesmen. Some had lost family in the storm. Others had simply been terrified by how close they had come to losing everything. I don't understand, Ruth Thornton said, watching another group of students take notes as Eleanor explained the principles of underground ventilation. A month ago, these same people were calling you crazy. Now they're treating you like some kind of prophet. They're not treating me like a prophet. They're treating me like someone who has information they need. Eleanor shrugged. Fear is a powerful motivator. More powerful than pride, more powerful than stubbornness. They're not here because they believe in me. They're here because they're scared. Does the reason matter? No. What matters is that they learn. What matters is that the next time a storm like this comes, fewer people die. Do you really think it will come again? Eleanor thought about Ezekiel Moss, about his warning, about the way he had talked about the storm as if it were just the beginning of something larger. I think the world is changing, she said quietly. I think winters are going to get harder. I think the people who survive will be the ones who adapt. And I think... She paused, looking at Rose, who was sleeping peacefully in Ruth's arms. I think I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people help each other, where knowledge is shared instead of hoarded, where being different isn't a crime. That's a beautiful dream. It's not a dream. It's a choice. And I'm making it. January 25th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The newspaper reporter arrived from Denver. His name was Charles Whitfield, and he worked for the Rocky Mountain News. He had heard about the blizzard, about the death toll, about the pregnant widow who had saved 11 lives with an underground shelter everyone said would fail. I want to write your story, he told Eleanor. I want the whole territory to know what you did. Why? Because it's extraordinary. Because people need to hear about survival and hope and determination in the face of impossible odds. Because... He hesitated. Because I think your story might save lives. People read about what you built, how you built it, why you built it, and maybe they'll build their own shelters. Maybe next time there's a storm, fewer mothers will bury their children. Eleanor considered his words carefully. She had never wanted fame, never wanted attention. All she had wanted was to survive, to keep her daughter alive, to prove that she wasn't crazy. But the reporter was right. Her story could save lives. Her knowledge could spread. The shelter she had built could become a blueprint for hundreds, thousands, millions of others. What do you want to know? She asked. Charles Whitfield smiled. Everything. January 30th. Throughout the day. The article ran on the front page. Pregnant widow saves 11 lives with underground shelter. The headline screamed. Below it, a detailed account of everything Eleanor had done. The digging, the construction, the mockery she had endured, the storm, the refugees who had pounded on her door in the middle of the night. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country, from New York and Boston and San Francisco, from farmers in Nebraska and miners in Colorado and fishermen in Maine. Everyone wanted to know more. Everyone wanted to learn. Everyone wanted to build their own shelter to protect their own families, to never feel as helpless as they had felt when they heard about the Wyoming blizzard and its hundreds of dead. You're famous, Ruth Thornton said, reading through the latest stack of letters. People are calling you a hero, a pioneer, a visionary. I'm none of those things. Then what are you? Eleanor looked at Rose, now 2 months old, healthy and growing, and completely unaware of the chaos her mother had caused. I'm a mother who refused to let her daughter freeze. That's all. February 1st. Evening. Jacob Thornton asked to speak with Eleanor alone. They stood at the entrance of the shelter, watching the sun set over a landscape that was slowly recovering from the storm. The snow was melting. The temperature was rising. Life was returning to a territory that had seemed dead just 2 weeks before. I've been thinking, Jacob said, about everything that happened, everything I did. And I don't know how to make it right. I don't know if it's even possible to make it right. I tried to take your home. I tried to have you committed. I told everyone who would listen that you were crazy, that your shelter would collapse, that you were a danger to yourself and your baby. He paused, his jaw tightening. And then you saved my life. You saved my wife's life. You saved my children's lives. How do I repay that? You don't. What? You don't repay it. That's not how this works. Eleanor turned to face him. I didn't save you because I wanted something in return. I saved you because you were dying and I had the power to help. That's it. There's no debt. There's no ledger. There's just people doing what they can for each other when the world is falling apart. That's very generous of you. No, it's practical. Grudges take energy. Energy I need for other things. She looked back at the sunset. But if you really want to do something, there is one thing. Anything. Learn. Build your own shelter. Teach others. Spread the knowledge so that the next time a storm comes,
You don't need me to save you." She met his eyes. "The best thing you can do for me, Jacob Thornton, is to make sure you never need my help again. Because that means I did something right." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Good." Eleanor turned and walked back into the shelter. "Then we're done here." February 14th, Valentine's Day. A letter arrived from the territorial governor. It was addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, and it contained an invitation to speak at the territorial capital about emergency preparedness and underground construction techniques. The governor wanted to establish a program to teach people how to build shelters like Eleanor's, funded by the territorial government, available to anyone who wanted to learn. "This is incredible," Martha Brennan said, reading the letter over Eleanor's shoulder. "The governor himself, asking for your help." "It's not incredible. It's necessary." Eleanor set the letter aside and looked at Rose, who was learning to smile and reaching for everything within grabbing distance. The storm killed over 300 people. 300. And most of them didn't have to die. They died because they didn't know what I knew. They died because no one taught them how to survive. And now you're going to teach them. Yes, everyone who wants to learn. Free of charge. You could charge. People would pay. I know, and I don't care. Eleanor picked up her daughter and held her close. My father gave his knowledge away freely. He taught anyone who asked, even when he could have made money by keeping his secrets to himself. He said that knowledge was like a candle. You could use it to light 1,000 other candles without diminishing your own flame. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. And he died because someone else wasn't. Someone who cut corners, who didn't shore up a tunnel properly, who put profit over safety. Eleanor's voice hardened. I won't be that person. I won't let anyone die because I was too greedy or too proud to share what I know. Even the people who mocked you, who tried to destroy you. Eleanor thought about Jacob Thornton, about Margaret Foster, about everyone who had signed that petition, who had called her crazy, who had prayed for her failure. Especially them, she said, because they're the ones who need it most. February 20th. Morning. Eleanor stood at the entrance of her shelter one last time before leaving for the capital. The snow was almost gone now. The land was starting to show green again. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing the first bird song she had heard since before the storm. Behind her, 16 people had gathered to see her off. The Hendersons, the Thorntons, Tommy Wheeler, Martha Brennan. All the people she had saved. All the people who had once been strangers or enemies and were now something else entirely. Family. Not by blood, not by choice, by circumstance, by survival, by the shared experience of staring death in the face and somehow making it to the other side. You'll be back, Ruth asked, clutching Rose to her chest. I'll be back. This is my home. This is my daughter's home. No matter what happens out there, I'll always come back. Promise. Eleanor smiled a real smile, the first one that had come easily in months. Promise. She climbed onto the horse the governor had sent for her and took one last look at the shelter she had built with her own hands. The hole in the hillside that everyone had mocked, the grave they said she was digging. It had become a sanctuary, an ark, a beacon. And now its light was going to spread across the entire territory. Eleanor Harrison turned her horse toward the rising sun and began the journey that would change everything. Behind her, Rose Harrison, 2 months old, strong alive, slept peacefully in Ruth Thornton's arms, dreaming of a future. Her mother was building one lesson at a time. The Capitol building was the largest structure Eleanor had ever entered. She stood in the doorway, clutching her notes, feeling smaller than she had felt since the day she first lifted a pickaxe against that Wyoming hillside. Around her, men in expensive suits hurried past, barely glancing at the woman in the simple wool dress who had traveled 300 miles to speak to them about digging holes in the ground. Mrs. Harrison, a young man in spectacles, approached her, clipboard in hand. That's me. The governor is ready for you. Follow me, please." She followed him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past portraits of important men who had never dug anything with their own hands, past offices filled with papers and politics, and everything she had spent her life avoiding. Finally, they reached a door marked Governor's Chamber. "Go on in," the young man said. "He's expecting you." Eleanor took a breath, then another. Then she pushed open the door and stepped into her future. Governor Francis Warren was not what she expected. He was younger than she had imagined, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake that suggested he had done real work at some point in his life. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit. I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Thank you, sir. I read the newspaper article. Remarkable story. Truly remarkable." He leaned back in his chair and studied her. "But I want to hear it from you, not the polished version, the real version. What made you dig that shelter?" Eleanor thought about the question, about all the ways she could answer it, about the truth that lay beneath every other truth. "Fear," she said finally. "I was afraid of dying. I was afraid of my baby dying, and I was more afraid of that than I was of being called crazy. That's honest. It's the only way I know how to be." Warren smiled a genuine smile, not the politician's smile she had expected. "Good, because I don't need another person who tells me what I want to hear. I need someone who tells me what's true." He leaned forward. "Here's what I'm proposing. A territorial program to teach people how to build underground shelters, funded by the government. Free to anyone who wants to learn. And I want you to run it." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Me? You built the only shelter that survived the storm intact. You saved 11 lives. You've already started teaching others. Who else would I ask?" "I'm a widow, a mother. I have no formal education, no credentials, no—" "You have something better than credentials, Mrs. Harrison. You have results." Warren stood and walked to the window. 312 people died in that storm. 312. And do you know what the territorial legislature did afterward? They debated. They formed committees. They commissioned studies, while you were already teaching people how to survive. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why you're the right person for this job. He turned back to her. "What do you say?" Eleanor thought about Rose back in Wyoming with Ruth Thornton. Thought about the shelter she had built, the lives she had saved, the knowledge she had accumulated through months of back-breaking work. "I say yes," she heard herself answer. "On one condition." "Name it." "I teach everyone, rich and poor, white and colored, men and women, anyone who wants to learn regardless of who they are or where they come from." Warren's eyebrows rose. "That's a progressive position, Mrs. Harrison." "It's a practical position. Death doesn't discriminate, Governor. Neither should survival." A long pause. Then Warren extended his hand. "Deal." Spring of 1888. Eleanor Harrison became the first woman to hold an official position in the Wyoming territorial government. The title was Director of Emergency Preparedness, a position created specifically for her with a budget that would have seemed like a fortune to the woman who had traded butter and eggs for timber just 1 year earlier. She didn't care about the title. She didn't care about the budget. She cared about the work. Her first class had 47 students. By the end of the month, she had trained over 200. By the end of the year, more than 1,000 people had learned the basics of underground construction from the woman they called the Tunnel Lady of Wyoming. "You're changing things," Martha Brennan told her during one of Eleanor's visits back to her shelter. "I've been alive for 73 years, and I've never seen one person change so much so fast." "I'm not changing anything. I'm just teaching what I know." That is changing things. Knowledge changes everything. Rose was 6 months old now, healthy and growing with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. She had learned to roll over, to sit up, to reach for things she wanted, with a determination that made Eleanor laugh. "She's going to be trouble," Ruth Thornton said fondly. "Just like her mother."
I hope so. The world needs more trouble. Summer of 1888. The first shelters built by Eleanor's students began to appear across the territory. Some were crude, rough holes in the ground, with minimal shoring and questionable ventilation. Others were works of art, carefully engineered structures that improved on Eleanor's original design in ways she hadn't imagined. She visited as many as she could, offering advice, correcting mistakes, learning from innovations. Each shelter was different. Each builder had their own style, their own solutions, their own way of adapting the basic principles to their specific needs. "This is better than mine," Eleanor admitted to a Swedish immigrant named Lindqvist, examining his ventilation system. "How did you figure out the double-channel approach?" "Back home, we build ice houses," Lindqvist explained. "Same principles, different application. The air needs to move, but it also needs to stay cool. 2 channels let you control both." "Would you teach this to others?" "Of course. Knowledge wants to be shared." Eleanor smiled. Her father would have liked this man. Fall of 1888. A letter arrived from Massachusetts. It was addressed to Rose Harrison, care of her mother, and it contained something that made Eleanor sit down hard on the nearest chair. A scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for when Rose came of age. "I don't understand," Eleanor said to the governor when she showed him the letter. "Rose is less than a year old. She can't even walk yet." "It's not about Rose," Warren explained. "Not directly. It's about what you have done, what you represent. People want to invest in the future you're building." "I'm not building a future. I'm teaching people to dig holes." "You're teaching people to survive, to think, to solve problems that everyone else said were unsolvable. That's the most valuable education there is." Eleanor looked at the letter again, at the formal language and the impressive letterhead, and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine for her daughter. "She might not want to go to college," she said finally. "Then she doesn't have to. But she'll have the choice. That's the point, isn't it? Giving people choices." Eleanor folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's exactly the point." Winter of 1889. Another storm came. Not as bad as the Great Blizzard, but bad enough. 3 days of howling wind and killing cold. Roads blocked. Telegraph lines down. Families trapped in their homes with nothing but their preparations and their prayers. Eleanor waited in her shelter with Rose, listening to the wind scream and wondering how many people were dying out there, how many families who hadn't learned, how many children who wouldn't see spring. When the storm passed, she rode out to survey the damage. The news was mixed. 47 dead across the territory. 47 lives lost to cold and wind, and the cruel mathematics of survival. But also, 112 people who had survived in underground shelters built using techniques Eleanor had taught. 112 people who would have died without her knowledge. 112 families who would celebrate Christmas instead of mourning. "It's not enough," she told Martha Brennan. 47 people. 47. It's 65 fewer than last year. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Eleanor looked at her hands, calloused, scarred, marked by years of work that had started with a pickaxe and evolved into something she still didn't fully understand. "The point is that every death is a failure, my responsibility." "That's pride talking, child." "What?" "You heard me. Pride." Martha's eyes were sharp. "You think you can save everyone. You think one woman with a shovel and a dream can prevent every death, every tragedy, every act of nature. That's not determination. That's arrogance." "I don't." "You do. I can see it in your eyes. Every person who dies is a personal failure to you. Every storm is a test you need to pass perfectly." Martha shook her head. "That way lies madness, Eleanor, and exhaustion, and a daughter who grows up without a mother because her mother worked herself to death trying to do the impossible." Eleanor opened her mouth to argue,
then closed it. Because Martha was right. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. "Accept that people will die. Give up trying to save them." "No, you keep teaching. You keep building. You keep doing everything you can. But you also accept that you're human, that your reach has limits, that some battles can't be won no matter how hard you fight." Martha took Eleanor's hands in hers. "You've already done more than any one person should be expected to do. The question isn't whether you've done enough. The question is whether you can live with the knowledge that enough will never be enough." Eleanor looked at Rose, who was playing with a wooden toy Eleanor had carved for her, completely unaware of the weight her mother carried. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the first wise thing you've said all day." The years passed. Rose grew from an infant to a toddler to a child. She learned to walk in the underground shelter, taking her first steps on the same packed earth floor where she had been born. She learned to talk, forming words that echoed off the clay walls. She learned to read by candlelight, curled up on the bed her mother had built, surrounded by books that arrived from all over the country. Gifts from people who had never met Eleanor Harrison, but wanted to support her work. "Mama," Rose asked one night when she was 5 years old, "why do you teach people to dig?" Eleanor put down the letter she was reading and looked at her daughter. "Because digging saved our lives, and I want to help save other people's lives too." "But you could do other things. Other mamas work in stores, or cook, or sew clothes." "I could, but this is what I know how to do. This is what I'm good at." "Are you the best digger in the whole world?" Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep inside. "No, sweetheart. I'm not the best at anything. I'm just someone who didn't give up when everyone told me to." "That's what I want to be when I grow up. Someone who doesn't give up." Eleanor felt her eyes fill with tears. "Then you will be," she whispered. "You absolutely will be." Rose turned 7, the same year the territorial legislature formally recognized Eleanor's program as essential public infrastructure. She turned 10, the year her mother's teaching methods were adopted by 3 other territories. She turned 13 the year Eleanor was invited to speak at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, addressing an audience of thousands about emergency preparedness and the principles of earth-sheltered construction. And she turned 16 the year she told her mother she wanted to become an architect. "An architect," Eleanor repeated, not quite believing what she was hearing. "Yes, I want to design buildings, buildings that work with the earth instead of against it, buildings that keep people safe." Rose's eyes were bright with passion. Daniel's eyes, Eleanor thought, filled with Daniel's dreams. "You taught me that shelter is the most important thing. Now I want to take that knowledge and make it bigger, better. I want to design shelters that can hold whole communities, shelters that can survive anything. Architecture school is hard to get into, especially for women. I know, but I have that scholarship, the one from Massachusetts." Eleanor had almost forgotten about the letter. The promise made when Rose was still an infant, still too young to understand the world she had been born into. "You want to go to MIT. I want to try, even if they don't accept me, even if I fail." Rose met her mother's eyes. "You taught me that failing is better than not trying. Were you wrong?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, this young woman who had grown up in an underground shelter, who had never known a father but had never lacked for love, who had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's dreams and something else entirely her own. "No," Eleanor said. "I wasn't wrong. Rose Harrison left for Massachusetts in the fall of 1903. She was 17 years old, the only woman in her class, and completely unprepared for the hostility she would face from professors and classmates who believed that architecture was no place for a female mind. She wrote to her mother every week. "They called me a novelty today," one letter read. "Said I was only accepted because of my mother's fame. Said I didn't belong here and never would." Eleanor wrote back immediately. "They called me crazy too. They said I was digging my own grave. They were wrong about me, and they're wrong about you.
Keep going. I'm the only woman in the structural engineering class. Another letter read. The professor refuses to call on me. The other students won't sit near me. I eat lunch alone every day. Eleanor's response. Good. More time to study. More time to prove them wrong. The letters continued for 4 years. Through failures and successes. Through moments of triumph and moments of despair. Through a curriculum that was never designed for women and a society that couldn't quite believe a woman could design buildings that would stand. Rose graduated in 1907, top of her class. The first woman to earn an architecture degree from MIT with a specialization in earth-sheltered construction. Eleanor traveled to Massachusetts for the ceremony. She sat in the audience with Martha Brennan, who was 89 now, and had sworn she would live to see that girl graduate or die trying. When Rose's name was called, Eleanor stood. When Rose crossed the stage, Eleanor cheered. And when Rose accepted her diploma and looked out at the audience, her eyes finding her mother's face, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt since the day she first held her daughter in that underground shelter 20 years earlier. Complete, overwhelming, impossible joy. I did it, Mama, Rose said afterward, clutching her diploma like a shield. I actually did it. I never doubted you would. Yes, you did, at least a little. Eleanor laughed. Maybe a little. But I also knew that if anyone could do the impossible, it was the girl who was born during a blizzard in a hole in the ground. Rose returned to Wyoming as a licensed architect. She opened her own firm in 1910, specializing in earth-integrated buildings that used her mother's principles as a foundation for something entirely new. Her designs were revolutionary structures that were built into hillsides that used the Earth's natural temperature regulation that could survive floods and fires and storms that would destroy conventional buildings. You're doing what I always dreamed of doing, Eleanor told her, reviewing the plans for Rose's first major project, a community shelter that would hold 50 families during emergencies. What I couldn't do because I didn't have the training. You did have the training. You trained yourself. Everything I know I learned from you. I taught you to dig holes. You taught yourself to build monuments. Same thing, Rose said, smiling. Just different scales. The years continued to pass. Eleanor grew older. Her hair turned white. Her hands, once strong enough to swing a pickaxe for hours, became gnarled and stiff with arthritis. But she never stopped teaching, never stopped sharing what she knew, never stopped believing that knowledge was meant to be given away, not hoarded. In 1920, the state of Wyoming dedicated a memorial to the victims of the Great Blizzard of 1888. Eleanor was invited to speak. She stood at the podium, 84 years old, looking out at a crowd that included governors and senators, journalists and historians, and hundreds of ordinary people whose families had survived because of what she had taught. 32 years ago, she began, her voice still strong. I was a pregnant widow with no money, no help, and no hope. I had a cabin that couldn't keep out the cold, and a baby who would die if I didn't do something. So I picked up a pickaxe and started digging. She paused, letting the words settle. Everyone told me I was crazy. They said the tunnel would collapse. They said I was digging my own grave. They signed petitions to have me committed. They rode past my property every day waiting for me to fail. Another pause. I didn't fail. And because I didn't fail, 11 people survived the worst storm this territory has ever seen. 11 people who were alive because I refused to listen to everyone who said it couldn't be done. Her eyes moved across the crowd, finding faces she recognized. The children of people she had saved, now adults with children of their own. The students she had taught, now teachers themselves. The architects and engineers and planners who had built on her work and taken it further than she had ever imagined. I'm not here to take credit, she continued. I'm not here to say I did something special. I did what any mother would do to protect her child. I did what any human being would do when faced with death. I survived. That's all. But I am here to say this knowledge is not meant to be kept secret. Skills are not meant to be hoarded. When you learn something that could save a life, you share it. You teach it. You give it away to anyone who will listen. Because the world is full of storms, and the only way to survive them is together. She stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly, then grew, then became a thunderous roar that echoed off the mountains and the sky and the earth itself. Eleanor Harrison didn't bow, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the ovation. She simply looked at the crowd, at all these people who were alive because she had refused to give up, and she smiled. 1 month after the memorial dedication, Eleanor Harrison went to sleep in her underground shelter and didn't wake up. She was 84 years old. She had taught over 10,000 people. She had inspired a movement that had spread across the entire country. She had raised a daughter who was now the most celebrated architect in the American West. And she had done it all starting with nothing but a pickaxe and a refusal to die. Rose found her mother the next morning peaceful in the bed she had built with her own hands in the chamber she had carved from the Wyoming hillside 40 years earlier. She went the way she wanted, Martha Brennan said at the funeral. The old midwife was 92 now, still sharp, still fierce, still refusing to die until she was good and ready. In her home, in her shelter, surrounded by the earth she loved. She never wanted to leave, Rose agreed. She told me once that this place was the only thing she had ever built that mattered, the only thing that would last. She was wrong about that. Rose looked at Martha. What do you mean? I mean that shelter isn't the only thing she built. She built you. She built a movement. She built a way of thinking that's going to survive long after that hole in the ground has collapsed. Martha's eyes were bright. Your mother built something that can't be destroyed, Rose. She built hope. And hope doesn't need walls to stand. They buried Eleanor next to Daniel in the small cemetery at the top of the hill where her chimney smoke still rose into the sky. The grave marker was simple, just as she would have wanted. Eleanor Harrison, 1856 to 1928. She dug deep and found warmth. Rose visited every year on the anniversary of the Great Blizzard. She would stand at her mother's grave and tell her about the buildings she was designing, the families she was helping, the students she was teaching, the legacy she was carrying forward. They want to make your shelter a historical landmark, she told her mother in 1935. The state is going to preserve it. Open it to visitors. Tell your story to everyone who comes. She paused, looking at the grave marker. I told them yes. I told them you would have wanted people to see it, to learn from it, to understand what one woman with nothing but determination could accomplish. The wind blew across the hilltop, carrying the scent of sage and earth. I miss you, Mama, every day. But I know you're not really gone. You're in every shelter that's ever been built, every life that's ever been saved, every person who looked at something impossible and said, I'm going to try anyway. Rose placed her hand on the cold stone. Thank you. For everything. For teaching me that fear is just a feeling, and feelings can be overcome. For showing me that being called crazy is better than being called a coward. For proving that one person can change the world if they're stubborn enough to try. She straightened up and looked at the shelter entrance, still visible in the hillside below. I'll keep building, Mama, I promise. I'll keep teaching and learning and trying and failing and trying again. Because that's what you taught me. That's who I am. She turned and walked down the hill back toward the world that was waiting for her. Behind her, the wind continued to blow. And the earth continued to hold its warmth year after year, century after century, exactly as Eleanor Harrison had always known it would. The shelter still stands today. Visitors can walk through the entrance tunnel, duck through the timber frame doorway, and stand in the oval chamber where 11 people survived the worst blizzard in American history. The fireplace still works. The spring still flows. The earthen walls still maintain that steady 55-degree temperature that Eleanor discovered over 130 years ago. The guides tell her story to every group that passes through. They talk about the pregnant widow who was mocked for digging a hole in the ground. They talk about the neighbors who tried to have her committed. They talk about the storm that killed hundreds and the shelter that saved 11. They talk about the teaching and the legacy and the daughter who became an architect and the thousands of lives that were saved because one woman refused to give up.
But the part of the story that resonates most is simpler than all of that. It's about a woman who was told she couldn't, a woman who was told she shouldn't, a woman who was told that what she was doing was impossible, foolish, crazy, doomed to fail. And she did it anyway. Because sometimes the craziest thing you can do is listen to your own wisdom when everyone else's wisdom has failed. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep digging when everyone tells you to stop. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is survive so that you can help others survive too. Eleanor Harrison was not a hero. She was not a prophet. She was not a saint. She was a mother who refused to let her daughter freeze. She was a widow who refused to surrender to despair. She was a woman who picked up a pickaxe and changed the world. They told her she was digging her own grave. They were wrong. She was digging a path to survival. She was digging a foundation for hope. She was digging one swing at a time, the future her daughter would inherit, and the legacy that would outlive them both. And when the storm came, when death howled at her door, when everyone who had mocked her came crawling through the snow begging for salvation, she opened that door and let them in. Not because she had forgiven them, not because she was kind, because she understood something they never had. The earth doesn't care about grudges. The cold doesn't care about pride. Survival doesn't care about who was right and who was wrong. All that matters in the end is who keeps digging. Eleanor Harrison kept digging until the day she died, and the world is still warmer because of it.